So today's video is going to be on the subject of cryptocurrencies, and the specific topic that I'm going to talk about is why it's going to be very difficult for these cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, Ethereum, and many of the other ones that exist in the current market to actually become legitimate currencies that compete with things like the US dollar, the yen, the euro, and all of these other legitimate currencies that are backed by huge governments. And so the discussion of today is going to be talking a little bit about the main issues that these currencies have before they can actually become mainstream and something that really is truly accepted by the markets and people around the world. Now, just to start off, I'm not really going to go into a huge technical side of what these cryptocurrencies are, like Bitcoin or Ethereum. Really, all you need to know for this video is that a cryptocurrency is a currency that exists entirely in the virtual world. That means there's no coinage, there's no paper, you're never going to have something on you. It all exists on the web. And the second major thing that is really important to understand about cryptocurrencies is that within the currencies themselves, there is a predetermined formula about how much of that currency is created over time. There's predetermined formulas that ensure only a set amount is made over time. When you look at something like the US dollar, the amount of currency minted or printed is determined by the US Treasury. They control how much they want to make, they can increase it, they can decrease it. And so they control that. With Bitcoin and these other cryptocurrencies, it is a set amount, and that is very important to understand. And it's one of the reasons that Bitcoin and these other cryptocurrencies are very appealing to many people, is because there is no overarching government organization that backs them and controls them per se. And obviously they have the anonymity that comes along with that, the inability to track those coinage as well for some individuals, but that's really all you need to know. Again, if you want to learn more about the technical side, there are hundreds of videos you can find out there that will do a far better job than I ever could to explain that, and it's somewhat of an interesting topic, but definitely not for this video. And so, next thing that I just want to quickly talk about is sort of talking about a brief history of how currency came to be, and it's going to be pretty important for the video just to sort of give context. So, way back in the day when we were sort of cave people walking around, you would have to find, say you had berries and you wanted to trade with someone for furs, you would have to figure that out. You would barter, you would trade. You would have to find someone who wanted your item that had the item that you wanted, and you would exchange and figure things out. Fairly complicated, fairly hard to do, very inefficient. Then people moved on to a system where they had sort of a set of items that had value to almost everybody, whether it be gemstones, gold, silver. And so you could take your gold and say, okay, well, I'll trade you for your furs. And there was sort of an understanding that that person could then take that gold and exchange it for something else that they wanted. And that was sort of the earliest form of currency. Within that, they eventually started minting coins. Still, it had the backing of the precious metals themselves in the gold and the silver and everything along those lines, but it had predetermined amounts. It was something that was accepted by the people that were using it, and eventually it moved to paper currency. And so in the United States, that was during the Civil War when they needed to start printing out money, and eventually they actually got rid of the gold standard that backed that money. And so in the past, what would happen is if you had, say, $500 worth of US currency, you could go to the bank and say, I want to exchange this for $500 worth of gold. So it had a gold standard backing it. And eventually they got rid of that. But modern day currencies still have the backing of the massive government organizations that produce them and support them. So when you think of the US dollar, it has the backing of the US Treasury and the US government. And there is an understanding that as long as those institutions are solvent, as long as they are still working properly, there is an understanding that that money, that currency, has value. And so that last statement, has value, is going to be the key point of this video. And this is the biggest issue that Bitcoin and these other cryptocurrencies have in actually becoming legitimate currencies. They don't actually have any value. And that may seem a bit weird at first, because if you actually went and looked at the price of Bitcoin today, or over the last couple of months, it's within the range of $4,550. Now, it fluctuates a lot, so depending on when you're watching this video, it might have changed. But Obviously, there is a huge price tag associated with a single Bitcoin. How can you say it doesn't have any value? Well, the only reason Bitcoin at this current time is worth that much is because there is someone else who is willing to buy it for that. There is no intrinsic value associated with Bitcoin. There's nothing backing it. So right now, with cryptocurrencies that exist, you only have a hope and a dream that someone else is going to be willing to exchange money for it. So in case this is being a little bit confusing, I'm going to use sort of an example or an analogy. Let's say that you had $100 worth of Bitcoin, or 100 Bitcoins rather, at the 4,500. Well, you're doing pretty well. You have a lot of money there. And let's say tomorrow, or right now, there are 100,000 people in the world that are willing to buy those Bitcoins off of you. They believe that it has that $4,550 value, so they're willing to give US dollars for that. They're willing to exchange it, so it has value. But let's say tomorrow, the very next day, that those 100,000 people who are willing to exchange for that money beforehand, they're gone. They're like, I'm not gonna touch this. I'm not gonna actually exchange for this. How much is the value of your Bitcoin now? 0. It is worthless. The only value that Bitcoin has is the willingness of someone else to trade for it, the willingness of someone else to buy for it. And what's the difference between, say, a cryptocurrency and the American dollar? Well, the American dollar has a massive institution in the American Treasury that backs that currency. There is a government that guarantees that currency. Now, could that government fall? Could it eventually break, default, whatever it might be? Yes, but it is very unlikely. So there is a lot of security. There is intrinsic value with that money because there is somebody backing it. There is a massive organization that is, in effect, guaranteeing it. So even if tomorrow you have 100,000 people that no longer want that money, there is still a government that is backing it. It still has value. Whereas Bitcoin and these cryptocurrencies, it is only based on market demand. That's a huge issue because market demand can be quite fickle. And if you actually look at the sort of fluctuations of Bitcoin over the last couple of months and years, it's actually skyrocketed. You could be saying, well, if it's worth 4,550 a Bitcoin, probably going to be more in a couple of weeks. What is the likelihood of it ever actually not having value? Well, there's a problem with that. And the first thing is it's actually happened in the past. Bitcoin, and sort of, you're going to hear me use that a lot throughout this video because it is sort of the mainstream and the biggest one, the largest cryptocurrency with the most hype around it, so it's easiest to talk about it, but most of the other cryptocurrencies are sort of following similar trends and paths. In the past, Bitcoin actually had a massive fallback. It hit 1,200 a couple of years ago, and it then collapsed. It fell down, sort of recovered, and then fell down again to around $200 Bitcoin. And looking today, you can say, well, it actually came back over time. But when you have a currency that has that kind of fluctuations, it's never going to be legitimized. Because it is solely based on demand, there's nothing backing it, there's no gold standard, there's no government, there's a lot of fear driven around that, and so when things happen, it has a cascade effect. Now looking at the price today, it has skyrocketed over the last couple of months. And if you know anything about economics, when something like this happens, there's typically bubbles that, does it have a real value or is it being inflated for other reasons? And it's being inflated for other reasons. So Bitcoin and these cryptocurrencies are currently in bubbles. That means their value is more than it should be for what the market sort of has right now, and bubbles pop. So last time you saw a drop of 1,200 to approximately 200. Well, this time it's going to be worse. It's going to go from that 4,550 and it's going to fall off. And the main difference from previous times with Bitcoin is in the past, Bitcoin was something that was really taken on by early adopters, people who were really passionate about it, and so they were more willing to stick with it and commit to it and sort of ensure that it continues going. Well, right now you have a lot of investors, people who are just getting on board because of the hype and they want to make money. So on this fall off, it's probably going to be far worse than before, and it's going to hurt the stability and reputability if Bitcoin does crash. Again, no guarantees. It might not be in a bubble, but realistically it is, and realistically it will pop at some point. So that's a huge issue. Because there's no value behind it, it goes through these huge fluctuations where it can fall dramatically, rise dramatically, fall dramatically, and that's not good for a currency. You never want that. So how do you fix this? How do you overcome these problems and actually legitimize yourself as a currency? If it was someone wanting to make Bitcoin, say, the dominant currency in the world, well, you have two options. or so far, two options, and that is to have a gold standard like they did in the past. So you take a Bitcoin and say you can exchange this Bitcoin for this amount of gold. You give Bitcoin and these other cryptocurrencies value. And you can also do that by having a very large, a very reputable organization back it. And so you may be saying, well, why don't they just do that? You can just go ahead and make sure that these currencies become mainstream and they're efficient in other senses, so why don't you do it? Well, it's very difficult. When you look at Bitcoin, Ether, and these other cryptocurrencies, there is going to be no organization, massive organization that wants to take these on. Why? Because they do not have control over the currencies. Why would a government, why would a massive institution ever back something that they cannot control, something that they cannot change and manipulate to benefit them? When you think of the American Treasury and the American dollar, well, they have a tremendous amount of power because they can choose how much they want to print, they can choose how much they want to distribute, they have enormous power because of that. If tomorrow the American Treasury decided to say, well, from now on we're actually going to move towards Bitcoin and we're going to back that, they can't control it, they can't choose how much is made, so you're never going to see a massive organization adopt one of these cryptocurrencies. The second issue with gold, it kind of follows the same idea. Who's going to create a gold standard for Bitcoin? Who's going to create these gold standards for these cryptocurrencies? Why would you? There's no personal benefit. The only people that could do that are massive companies with tons of money, and there's really no reason because, again, they do not have control over it. That's one of the sort of considered prizes of these cryptocurrencies, is that no one controls them, but that's also one of its downfalls in that they're never going to become mainstream because no one is going to back them, no one is going to give them value by having the word of a massive organization or a gold standard. So you may be thinking, well, that's unfortunate, these cryptocurrencies seem to have a lot of benefits, so if it's unlikely they're ever going to become mainstream, that's unfortunate. Not true. I think the main issue, and again, this is an opinion piece, it definitely could turn out to be wrong. I don't think it's likely because these issues are things that are very real and a very real problem for these current cryptocurrencies, and it's very unlikely they're going to overcome them. But I do actually believe cryptocurrencies are the future. It's just that the current cryptocurrencies are not going to be the ones that actually become the major currencies of the world. What's going to happen is a major country probably is going to be someone who's going to incorporate a cryptocurrency into what they create. And so instead of having, say, Bitcoin where they cannot control how much is made, they are going to create cryptocurrencies. They're going to have blockchain and other things associated with them, but they're going to have some amount of control over it, some amount of power and influence in what it does. So it's probably more likely going to be a melding between the two, between a pre-existing currency like the American dollar and the sort of benefits that you often see with Bitcoin and these other things coming together to merge into one. That is likely the future. And again, as I've mentioned before in this video, and many of my videos, they are partially opinion pieces with facts based around them. So it is entirely possible that something different will happen, but based on what I see in the market and what a lot of other people see as well, is it's unlikely these cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, like Ether, are ever going to become the mainstream currencies that a lot of people hope they will be. And there's a lot of hype around them, but that hype isn't necessarily warranted. So if you're thinking about buying Bitcoin and Ether, be careful, be very cautious. They're pretty inflated right now, and it's probably not an area you want to get into if you're risk adverse or you don't want to lose a lot of money.